Senate.
The Senate is under call. Signify by saying aye. Those opposed, motion does prevail. Secretary will close the roll. Members, please stand for the prayer. Today I ask members to pause for a moment of silent prayer and reflection, and please remain standing for the Pledge of Allegiance. Secretary will take the roll.
Senators Abler, Anderson, Bach, Benson, Bigham, Carlson, Chamberlain, Champion, Clausen, Coleman, Swazinski, Dames, Dibble, Dornick, Draheim, Duckworth, Dietzick, Eaton, Icorn, Eakin, Fate, Friends, Gazelka, Goggin, Herr, Hoffman, Housley, Howe, Ingebritsen, Isaacson, Jasinski, Johnson, Johnson, Stewart, Kent, Kiffmeyer, Klein, Karan, Kunish, Lang, Latz, Limmer, Lopez, Franzen, Marty, Matthews, McEwen, Miller, Murphy, Nelson, Newman, Osmic, Pappas, Port, Pratt, Putnam, Rarick, Rest, Rosen, Rude, Senjum, Tomasoni, Torres, Ray, Utke, Weber, Westrom, Uyghur, Wickland.
Pursuant to Rule 14.1, the following members intend to vote under Rule 40.7. Senators Carlson, Champion, Clausen, Dibble, Fateh, Eaton, Eakin, Ingebretson, Jasinski, Kent, Newton, Rest, Tomasoni, and Torres Ray. A quorum is present. Beginning under the second order of business, executive and official communications, the following communication was received. Please make note, no action is required. Moving to the fifth order of business, I call on Senator Miller to adopt the motion or the committee report. Senator Miller.
Mr. President, I move that the committee reports printed in the agenda be adopted.
On the motion to adopt the committee reports, all those in favor signify by saying aye. Those opposed, the motion does prevail. Moving to the sixth order of business, the Secretary will read the Senate file number.
Senate file number 3023.
The Senate file has been given its second reading. Moving to the eighth order of business, introduction and first reading of bills. The bills listed on today's introduction calendar will be given their first reading and referred as indicated. Moving to the ninth order of business, motions and resolutions. We will adopt the author's motions as one motion. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed, the motion does prevail. Remaining under motions and resolutions, we will take up the confirmation calendar. Senator Kiffmeyer.
Thank you, Mr. President. This confirmation is in regards to a member of the Campaign Finance Board. And my understanding, Mr. President, is that the report from the Committee on State Government, Finance Policy and Elections dated February 10, 2022, be taken from the table.
To that motion, all those in favor of the motion signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed, motion does prevail. Senator Kiffmeyer.
Thank you, Mr. President. I now move that the foregoing report be now adopted.
To that motion, all those in favor of the motion signify by saying aye. Those opposed, the motion does prevail. Senator Kiffmeyer.
Thank you, Mr. President. I now move that in accordance with the report from the Committee on State Government, Finance, Policy, and Elections, that having given its advice to now consent to and confirm the appointment of George Soule for the position of Campaign Finance and Public Disclosure Board for a term expiring January 6, 2025.
To that motion, Senator Kiffmeyer.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. Soule is a well-respected member who has been appointed here by Governor Walz. He occupies an unrestricted board position, has been serving for about a year, and does not have a political party affiliation. He's currently the vice chair of the board for 2022. Prior to this, he's been a trial lawyer and founding partner of Soule & Stool, LLC in Minneapolis. He also serves as a tribal court of appeals judge for 4 tribes. He has graduated from the Minnesota State University Moorhead and the Harvard Law School. Mr. President and members, I would ask for your support for the confirmation of Mr. Soule.
Further discussion to the motion? Seeing none, all those in favor of the motion signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, the motion does prevail. Remaining under motions and resolutions, Senator Miller.
Mr. President, pursuant to Rule 26, I designate the following bill made special order for immediate consideration. Members, it's Senate File 2876.
Senate File 2876, number 16 on general orders. Senator Abler.
Thank you, Mr. President and members. COVID has been quite a time. It's been a time for a lot of, debate and concern and challenges, and other times it's been a time for us to cooperate and to work together and solve some of the challenges. Both of those are relevant and appropriate reactions. Last year we did some waivers that we passed into law in conjunction with the administration. We thought COVID would be done by the end of December. It's apparently off schedule, Mr. President. And so we didn't think we'd need these waivers any longer. And so Senate File 2876 is a collection of waivers worked out between the administration, still working with the other body. We're not quite in full total agreement, but we're getting pretty close to extend some of the flexibilities that were put into place. And I'll just read a little list of them for you, or what's in the bill. It's both Department of Health and Human Services. So just starting, if you're following through, we'll start on page 6 of the bill. The Emergency Services Regulatory Board needs some flexibilities. They can't get enough ambulance drivers. Senator Lang can discuss that more if anybody is interested. The Department of Health, there's some waiver of bed restrictions in hospitals and in nursing homes. And most of these will go till June 30th of this coming year. On the Human Services side, there's a number of those that allow for flexibility in how we take applications and attestations from various clients, allowing oral or written signatures in various programmings, allowing video conferencing, and waiving mandatory direct contact in the cases of and some of the child protection matters, which I'm concerned about, but they say it's going to be all right because they'll keep a track of that. Allowing qualified professionals to interactive telecommunications, and another one allowing oral, written, expressed approval of documents that usually require in-person signatures. They sound kind of minor, but in the operations of trying to keep our programs functional, they've been very helpful, and those are without really very much controversy. There's also a way to continue child care assistance program payments up until June 26th. That's a weird date. That's the end of the payments period. And the concern I had about that was that individuals might use that just with the way that there's some emergency grants that they would be allowed to double count that money, and so we, on the Senate side, decided to count that as income for the purposes of those grants, just to state that. I believe that will not be controversial. And also with child care, we're suspending the child care staff distribution requirements with a number of caveats that would allow them to deal with staff reductions and challenges of hiring people. There are two more elements, one of which the other body had a good idea, temporary staffing pool. That expired at the end of the year. Given the staff challenges, for up to 21 days, if you're really in trouble, you can apply to the staffing pool. And someone over in the other body had a clever eye about poaching that could happen. We'll take you from one group home to another one and give you a very large raise, maybe $28 an hour. Why would you not do that? So we agreed with them that a 30-day hold harm, where you can't go back, if they work 30 days or less than that, you can't have them work for your emergency pool. And Mr. President, you will be amazed, the original fiscal cost of this was $4.1 million. With adding a 30-day provision, and we were told, oh, we're careful about that, it dropped the fiscal note down to $1 million, which means that some of the pools originally were actually taking advantage of other entities in those long-term facilities, which just makes no sense at all. So we're trying to limit that. And so that was really quite interesting. The final element of the bill is not really a COVID matter, but it's an unfinished business situation that we were working on. And this is probably one of the last bills leaving port for a little while on the Human Services side, having to do with subminimum wage. And we set up a task force. The original concern was that if the feds decide you can't do subminimum wage, which are someone works at some pretty much menial tasks where they can get $1 an hour in some of the day services places, that the goal is that they could go get a a job outside of that place. And for some folks, that's just really very difficult, if you know. And so I don't see that. That's called 14C, if you want to know, Mr. President. So welcome to Human Services. You don't want to know. Anyway, but so we're going to need some element of that. And so the way the language got written in the bill, with the benefit of COVID and me working off of my cell phone and reading text that I wish I could have had printouts. So we tried to make it so it would discuss how to handle that situation going forward. So that's it's in the bill. We actually had Senator Uckey led a work group on this matter, and we would add a few more parents and others to the task force. So, Mr. President, that is the bill, and with that, I'll stand for questions.
Further discussion to Senate File 2876. Senator Klein.
Thank you, Mr. President. Will Senator Abler yield?
He will yield. Senator Klein.
Thank you, Mr. President. Senator Abler, we heard about the waivers portion of this bill in the Health and Human Services Committee, and there was a great deal of testimony from both sides. It was very balanced. I think we did a couple of verbal amendments to clean it up. In the committee, we did sort of responsible work to make this bill look the way it does and get this essential work out the door to, for this EMSRB board and for the nursing homes and care facilities, everything else seems to be very important that we pass that portion of it today. What was not discussed in the Health and Human Services Committee was any sort of debate from disability advocates or the business community about this additional language in Section 2 describing a change in the mission of the task force on sub-minimum wage. And so I guess, Senator Abler, can you tell me, I'm no longer in your Human Services Committee, was there an opportunity for disability advocates and the business community to come and give testimony before your committee on this language?
Senator Abler.
Well, thank you, Senator Klein. I appreciate the question. And I will be the first to agree that this is not necessarily a COVID-related matter, but I think it's an important matter. We had, I believe, 6 interim hearings this summer, and I think on 3 occasions we talked about this as an agenda item. And because it was controversial, we set up a working group led by Senator Uckey and Senator Hoffman in kind of a co-thing, and they met with all kinds of individuals. And this was the product of that work group. Senator Klein.
Senator Klein.
Well, thank you very much. I have no further questions for Senator Abler except to say that all of us, I think, have passionate voices in our communities and in our constituencies, people who consider themselves genuine disability advocates who have a spectrum of views on this sub-minimum wage issue. Certainly the business community has an interest as well. I've never heard testimony in committee from those groups, and it sounds as though Senator Abler did not either in his committee. And so, Mr. President, I'd like to offer the A50 amendment, please.
Sorry, Senator Klein, what number?
The A50.
Senator Klein moves the A50 amendment. Senator Klein.
Mr. President, this gives us the opportunity to get a clean vote on...
Senator Klein, getting a little ahead of myself. The Secretary will report the amendment.
Senator Klein moves to amend Senate File number 2876 as follows. Page 2, delete Section 2. This is the A50 amendment.
Senator Klein.
Mr. President, I request a roll call.
Recall requested, roll call granted. Senator Klein.
Mr. President, this gives us an opportunity to give a clean vote on this essential work of this body regarding these waivers, extending COVID waivers for emergency medical services and for nursing homes, et cetera, and removes the language regarding changing the mission of the task force on disability subminimum wage, which really is difficult, controversial work that deserves its own committee time and actually doesn't belong in this sort of essential fundamental bill. So this will remove the language regarding changing the task force mission, and I encourage a yes vote so that we can get this bill out the door in a clean fashion.
Senator Abler first, then Senator Utkey. Senator Abler.
Well, thank you, Mr. President. And, I appreciate your concern and your interest, Senator Klein, about getting the bill moving. The bill's moving. And we're in frequent communication with the other body about this. And just so you understand, I'm not even sure if I like the way we're doing it, but it's a good way to get a bill done get done well, and so it's a consensus bill. And so the general thinking is if either one side or the other or the governor decides something should not be in it, that's what the bill will be. We actually had many more waivers we wanted to include on our side, some with licensed home child care and some others that we decided to not proceed with at this time. But so just a comment and then another comment. This section has nothing to do with business. This has to do with what shall a person with the disability be doing to thrive at the most optimal level. And there is a large bell curve of individuals and the capacities that they hold and where they're most suited to actually go to work. And so we're not even talking about whether we should do this or not in this amendment. We're just talking about how shall we talk about it. Shall the topic be inclusive or shall the topic be exclusive? The application to be on this task force included an attestation that they supported removing 14C from our statutes, from the practice in Minnesota, which many of us feel would be catastrophic to the welfare of some of these individuals, maybe 7,000 individuals for whom this work is the best suited. This just says, can we talk about it? Can we bring in a few of the parents and the related individuals who might care about this? And so for that, Mr. President, members, I'd urge people to vote no. I think this discussion is highly appropriate.
No, I didn't.
And actually will advance the discussion. And so please vote no. Thank you.
Senator Utke.
Thank you, Mr. President. And Senator Abler did cover a number of the things I was going to bring up. But members, I would also strongly ask you to vote no on this bill. I was one of the group that held informational hearings a number of times this fall. This was an issue that got put in the HHS omnibus bill at the very end of session this past summer. And it has a lot more teeth to it than I guess any of us would have imagined. And that is the fact that everything here is to eliminate the sub-minimum wage part of our social services or our human services. We have, and the number varies a little bit, but up to 7,000 Minnesotans that depend on this. They are working jobs that they are extremely happy to have, and they do not want to lose them. These are jobs that do not justify minimum wages and higher because they, you know, due to their disability, are not able to produce a lot of work. But that doesn't make any difference. To those people, this is everything. And this study group was put together to eliminate those jobs. And all we want is to change it so that we would, we took out the word eliminate. We still have the study group. We actually added 4 more members to it. But in the end, and it's in there many different times in the amendment, the whole gist of it is, and I'll read what it's got, it's to promote independence and increase opportunities for people with disabilities to earn competitive wages. And that's all we want. We want to give them a fair shake. We want what's best for them. But if we go forward with just straight elimination of the 14C, you're going to move those Minnesotans that currently work under this, the majority are going to go into basically adult daycare. The job they have will be eliminated because it doesn't justify the minimum wage amount. It doesn't involve the business community. These aren't the people that are out working with job coaches, etc. A lot of these are in, you know, within the workshops of your DACs, etc. Working with these people and giving them some pride in what they do and a quality of life. So I would ask you to vote no on this amendment.
Senator Wickland.
Thank you, Mr. President. Yes, I rise to support Senator Klein's amendment to remove the task force language. I have two basic reasons. One, I do not think that it fits with the goal of the original bill that came forward was to have a set of waivers that could help people during COVID, that we could move through the process quickly so that they can be put back into use and assist people. And the waivers that are included in this bill today, I believe, are ones that will help a lot of people in multiple areas. The task force language that was amended on the first hearing in Senator Abler's committee was not discussed and part of the waiver discussion, and it is very controversial. I believe that there are people who have very strong opinions about the original language that was developed for the task force, and if there is a need for addressing changes, if people believe that there should be changes, we should bring that forward in a bill that can be discussed where testifiers can come in and give us their thoughts about the merits of changing it. This amendment or this task force is not going to have the ability to end subminimum wages. They will be bringing back a report in 1 year, and that report will deliver recommendations to the legislature. Just like we do with many other topics, as the recommendations come in, we will examine them and we will decide how to implement some of them or all of them, or perhaps even, not implement them but modify them. So I think that is the process that should have been used for this particular language, and I support voting yes on the amendment today. Thank you.
Senator Murphy.
Thank you, Mr. President and members, and I rise to speak in favor of Senator Klein's amendment. I am new to Senator Abler's committee, but not new to the topic. And if we think and look back on the policy that has been put in place regarding the health care and the care of people who have physical and intellectual disabilities, in many ways that policy requires people with disabilities to live in poverty. The spend down in medical assistance is a very good example, and so is the perpetuation of paying a less than minimum wage for people who are going to work. As I look at the language in this proposal, and particularly the language that Senator Aki raised for us, it talks about promoting independence and increasing opportunities for people with disabilities. And one of the best ways that we can do that is by paying a person who is going to work a fair wage, because we know what people earn is a way for them to achieve independence. I've heard my colleagues talk about this being a controversial issue, and it is. There's nothing easy about this issue. But if what we want for people in Minnesota and people with intellectual and physical disabilities is their independence, then by agreeing in policy that we will pay them less than a minimum wage, or as some call it, a sub-minimum wage for their labor, our goal of independence is not met. And that is why I believe it should be taken from this bill, and I support the amendment. Thank you.
Senator Hoffman.
Thank you, Mr. President. 1938 is when the special minimum wage certificate was added, Section 14C, and it was added on a couple of points. And it was to increase the ability for people that could not get competitive wages, the ability to work. And I'm going to take you back to a time in Minnesota when people were paid 25 cents a month to dig potatoes. 25 cents a month to dig potatoes. And they lived in our state institutions. And you think about how we've evolved in our discussions and our decisions, and there's a thing that is left out of this conversation, and it's what this amendment, let me back up. It's what the original bill that is sitting on the body of the floor here is attempting to get to, Mr. President. And you talk about informed choice. And the whole conversation about people with disabilities and getting what is due, or getting what their equality is, or getting what some equity is, there's a portion in there called informed choice. And the meaning of informed choice is decision sharing. Decision sharing. And what we did in committee and what we spent the last year discussing was what was missing from this task force in order to get to the informed choice discussion of decision sharing and decision making, right? That's to have all sorts of people sitting at the table, all sorts of folks that are able, not just those people that are making decisions in a box about what should happen, but rather what could be happening. And so I like what we did and what we have on the bill, Mr. President, is because having the word promote and having that piece of it is inclusive of that shared decision-making process, which, I don't know, informed choice. And all you have to do, Mr. President, is take a look at some legalistic issues that has occurred in the state of Minnesota. We'll start with the Jensen Settlement Agreement. We look at what Mito did. We look at those things. What word kept coming up and what word sits in front of us in the Olmstead Plan and the Olmstead decisions are the word informed choice. What Senator Abler and what we're trying to do in this bill as it sits on the body is to get informed choice back in this discussion. To be told that your purpose to be part of this task force from the very beginning is to eliminate something doesn't add to the equation of informed choice, Mr. President. What that adds to is I'm going to have a bias towards something. So what I'm saying here, Mr. President, is that vote no on this amendment and bring this clean language forward so we can keep this discussion going.
Senator Kiffmeyer.
Thank you, Mr. President and members, and I rise in support of the A50 amendment. But probably more than anything, when you realize that people with disabilities can do a great job, they can be dependable, hard workers, and equal to anybody in the work that they do. They may have a mental or physical issue that they have to contend with in addition to what other people may have, and they should be paid then commensurate with that effort. But the reason why I really like this amendment, the Section 2 that is in the bill, and do not like this amendment, is the positive language that it talks about not just phasing out the payment of sub-minimum wage, that's just such a bare bones bottom kind of approach, but instead it replaces it with promoting independence, increase opportunities to earn competitive wages. Not only that, having members appointed to this task force, one at least who has actually been paid a sub-minimum wage, what a value that you have as someone of that being part of that. And then adding parents or guardians with people with disabilities appointed to also deal with these issues. These are subject matter experts. They live with it. They understand it. So it's a very positive approach that deals with many of the things in a little more broad way that I think is very, very important for us to keep Section 2 in the amendment, and therefore, members, I urge you to vote no on Amendment 50. Thank you.
Senator Isaacson.
Thank you, Mr. President. I oftentimes get asked, are there a lot of tough votes at the Capitol? And I'm like, well, it depends on what you think of as tough. If you don't take your next election into account, then there really isn't. You just got to go on what you think is right or wrong. This is a great example of when votes get tough because it's created this all or nothing scenario and pits one very important group that has very important things to say against another in what feels like an all or nothing scenario. And that's where I struggle with this. My soul and absolutely my sense of what is right stands with folks that deserve to be paid their worth, and that having sub-minimum wages is a very difficult thing for me to be comfortable with because it puts people in a bad spot, it devalues them, it somehow makes it less than. At the same time, I have several locations in my district alone that do this kind of work. And I was on last night with a parent who was pleading with me to make sure we get rid of this effort to get rid of the sub-minimum wage because they knew their kid would not be able to go and make a living. They're only making, not just make a living, but have an opportunity to be at these places. And it puts them in an impossible position. It puts people who start making more in a position of losing their benefits because they make too much money. So you have on one side the very righteous and important work being done to make sure we value every human being as they make money and they're paid what they earned. And on the other side, we have a very important and complicated system that's put some folks at risk of losing what they need to be successful. This is not a zero-sum game, folks. We can solve this. We're smart enough to figure this out. What I'm disappointed by is the bill that this is in that tries to take a stab at, again, the all-or-nothing thing. It isn't appropriate. I think Senator Klein's amendment is completely appropriate. And let me be clear about this. Even though I agree with Senator Klein's amendment, that does not diminish my understanding of the need and the effort I will put forward to make sure that those folks that may lose either benefits or opportunity or ability to make money or a place to go that helps them feel productive and a part of life will continue to have that 100% all the time, never stopping. I will be working on that. That being said, I don't like the way this is being done. And I don't like it when in politics we play these zero-sum games. Because what it does is it makes these winners and losers. It doesn't have to. There is a way to solve this problem, to provide for those people the way we need to, and to make sure they're paid what they're worth. We have the capacity to do that. And that's where the discussion should be. It is unfair to put two groups against each other that are both trying to do the right thing. And I think we owe it to them to make sure we work together on that. So I do not support this amendment. Or I do support this amendment. Sorry, my bad. Thank you. I do support the amendment. I don't support what's in the bill right now. Thank you.
Senator Nelson.
Thank you, Mr. President. Well, we've had quite a discussion here, and I would just encourage members and the public to look at Section 2. And Section 2, the task force on subminimum wages, that is the genesis of Senator Abler's bill here, Senate File 2876. And you would think that does get to what my good colleague just mentioned, that yes, there should be choice. There should be informed choice. And what type of task force already in its title says this is what we are going to do? That seems like a task force in name only. I do not support the Klein Amendment, which reinserts the word eliminating subminimum wage. Now, I also agree with the importance of work. There is nothing more important than meaningful work. We should do everything we can to make sure every Minnesotan has the opportunity for meaningful work. And I think of places like the Ability Building Center in Rochester, which has many clients whom I have known for years, who have meaningful work, whether it be with a job coach in a grocery store, or whether it be putting stickers on important documents, or whether it be labeling different items for future use. I've been there, I've seen that. I have seen some of our workers do marvelous, marvelous jobs. They love their jobs. I heard from the parents of these grown adults from our sheltered workshops who were devastated when they couldn't go to their places of employment. It was socialization. It was meaningful work. And while it would be nice to think that all of those jobs would be there if the wage was increased to minimum wage, we know that it would not be. And I do not believe that it is right for us on the Minnesota Senate floor to take away those jobs from Minnesotans who are working in sheltered workshops, doing meaningful work, because we think they all must be at minimum wage. We have to think about the people involved and not the ideology that some think is so important. I encourage a no vote on the Klein Amendment.
Senator Abler.
Thank you, Mr. President. And I really appreciate the dialogue, especially the one. Everybody here really cares about individuals, and I don't see any of non-caring going on. The concern seems about the process. Just want to point out, if people would read in the bill, the existing task force, member selections are supposed to be been done by the first of the year, and the first meeting was supposed to have been done by February 15th of this year. And the reason this is being undertaken now is I don't think they've met yet. But here's a bill that we can actually make this right so the discussion can go forward. That's why I chose this particular bill, because it's actually moving and be taken up by both sides. And so there was an urgency to it. And with all respect to the rest of the conversations, I urge people to still vote no and let this process go in a very fair way. Thank you.
To the author of the amendment, Senator Klein.
Thank you, Mr. President. Well, the discussion on the floor today, I think, does prove my point that this is a complex issue, and we all have the best interests of the disability community at heart, but finding the solution to make sure that those interests are served involves a great deal of work and labor and listening to people who have their lives at stake in this process. It certainly doesn't belong in a bill extending waivers for COVID liberties for providers, and it certainly doesn't belong on the floor when it hasn't been heard in committee and had the opportunity for advocates on either side to give testimony. So please vote yes on the amendment.
Seeing no further discussion, the Senator Westrom.
Mr. President, I rise to support those in the developmental disabled community, and I rise to ask you to oppose the Klein amendment and stand up for those who value these jobs just like you and I value jobs, and the immense and tremendous aspect that is to their life all around. Senator Klein, I don't know if that's your intention, but the result of your amendment would mean these jobs go away. And that's why I rise to oppose
Point of order.
this.
Senator Westrom, you'll suspend Senator Klein. To what? Why do you rise?
Senator Westrom is directing his comments directly to me on the floor, Mr. President.
Senator Klein, are you saying that Senator Westrom is questioning your motives?
Motives and also addressing another member directly.
Senator Klein, members can certainly discuss individuals on the floor and what they may have said. However, questioning motives certainly is out of order. Senator Westrom, please try and restrain yourself to the amendment at hand, please. Thank you.
Mr. President, Dr. Klein, I did not say your intention is that. I said it might be. I don't know, I said, Dr. Klein. You didn't, or Senator Klein. Please listen to the words I said. I was not intending to question that. If you would have listened to the next phrase I was going to say, you would have heard clearly as well. But Senator Klein, albeit, I don't know if that's your intention or not, to be more clear. I don't think it is, but I want you to know, and I want the body to know, that will be the net result, well-intended or not, by the author of this amendment. I don't think that would be his intentions, Mr. President. Let's assume that's not his intentions for the purpose of this debate. But we need to vote on this with knowing the net result will affect thousands of those with developmental disabilities. If you want to adopt this amendment, it will affect thousands because those jobs will go away. And I'm going to share with you some passion from a constituent I talked with several times last summer, once at the Pope County Fair, to gain great insight into this issue. And if you think I'm passionate today, nothing like my constituent was for their grandson who works and has an opportunity, even with the autism spectrum he is on, that they have made the rest of their life mission to help him live independently. They even sold their farm place, moved into town so they could live next door to their grandson, so they can help him to the degree that he needs help, but he can live independently, and part of his independent living is working at an organization that allows him to have a job and get paid for the production he is able to produce. And his grandfather and his grandmother passionately want to get on this committee and advocate for their grandson and did everything they could. We wrote letters for them, and they are not able to get on the committee. So, members, this bill that Senator Abler has brought forward would actually allow my constituent or others like them to be able to bring that perspective that right now they think is not being looked at. And they know the net result if the sub-wage option goes away, their grandson is out of work. And the dignity it gives their grandson is something they will fight for till the end. And I want you to understand how important this is for those in the developmental disability communities or have some other situation or disability in their life that maybe they can't work as fast as you or I or somebody else, but they sure can work hard. And they take pride in what they do. And if they put half as many widgets in a box in a day that you or I or somebody else might be able to do, that's how they get measured. It's nothing about being sub. It's about being paid for what they can get done and making ways to have opportunities. Even though they might have somebody helping them, supervise them, otherwise they're going to be sitting at a home on their own, maybe a group home with several others, have all day to be doing nothing but sitting in their home, not having a job to look forward to go to. Maybe it's a public transit or some other arrangement that comes and picks them up. I'm thinking of another person that I know that does this. I know their family very well. And they just look forward to that bus picking them up in the morning. And when they come home, and they are on time like clockwork. And that's the kind of jobs that will be eliminated under this amendment. And so, members, stick with the original bill. Let's expand the opportunity for my constituent to maybe still try to get onto this committee and bring this perspective that he and his wife, my constituents from Pope County, are so passionate because it's their grandson. It's their grandson that they are fighting for, and they showed me that passion last summer at the Pope County Fair like I've never seen grandparents show me passion for a grandson before. Vote no on this amendment that would do away with these jobs.
Members, before I move on to additional speakers, I would like to make a couple of different points. Chapter 13, Section 121 of Masons, number 2, no person may indulge in personalities, impugn motives of members, or use indecent or profane language, or participate in conduct that disrupts or disturbs the orderly proceedings of the body. And also Section 124 regarding personalities not permitted during debate. You can certainly read that section yourself. So not saying that Senator Westrom necessarily violated them, Masons. However, I could say that there could be a case where it got awfully close to the line.
Mr. President, to that point.
Senator Latz.
Mr. President, thank you. Just to amplify that point, our own Senate rules, in addition to Masons, our own Senate rules, which are higher priority than Masons, Rule 36.2 specifically says the member, when speaking, shall avoid personality, and 36.8 does say all remarks during debate shall be addressed to the President. So just ask members to keep those in mind. Thank you.
Senator Latz, your comments are well taken. Senator Isaacson.
Well, I want to, first of all, Mr. President, thank you for making me speculate as the purpose of giving such a speech as he did. I'd hate to have to question Senator Westrom's intentions by speculation. Sometimes I get used to the fact that when we talk on the floor, others don't listen. But fortunately or unfortunately for you, I do. I pay close attention to what you're saying because words matter. And I want to be really clear about this. And I'm going to restate my point again, perhaps a little clearer. Both people on each side of this issue want to see good things done for the people in the disabled community. This is not an all or nothing approach. The hyperbole engaged in by Senator Westrom is an example of us being passionate about something, but not clearly stating exactly what we're talking about. Again, this is amended language already in the bill that has no place in this bill. On top of that, there's a task force designed to make sure that we leave nobody in the dark. I've talked to people on that task force. They are 100% committed to making sure our friends that are working today for less than minimum wage are going to be having a place to go and a purpose and jobs or whatever they need. So the idea here that we're stuck in this kind of either or, that if you vote against it, you're this, if you vote for it, this, you're this, that's the kind of rubbish I think the public is getting really tired of, because we frame these in there's all or nothing categories, and that's just not where we live. And to push that on the floor of the Senate, I think is unacceptable. We should be better than that. Vote for Senator Klein's bill. Amendment, sir, sorry.
Seeing no further discussion, the Secretary will take the roll on the A50 amendment.
Give it a third reading? Oh, yeah, got it.
I call on Senator Kunish to report members voting under Rule 40.7. Senator Kunish.
Thank you, Mr. President. On the A50 amendment, Carlson votes aye.
Carlson votes aye. Senator Kunish.
Champion votes aye.
Champion votes aye. Senator Kunish.
Clausen votes aye.
Clausen votes aye. Senator Kunish.
Dibble votes aye.
Dibble votes aye. Senator Kunish.
Eaton votes aye.
Eaton votes aye. Senator Kunish.
Eakin votes no.
Eakin votes no. Senator Kunish.
Kent votes aye.
Kent votes aye. Senator Kunish.
Newton votes no.
Newton votes no. Senator Kunish.
Rest votes aye.
Rest votes aye. Senator Kunish.
Senator Torres Ray votes aye.
Torres Ray votes aye. Senator Kunish.
Senator Fateh votes aye.
Fateh votes aye. Senator Kunish.
And Senator McEwen votes aye.
McEwen votes aye. I call on Senator Johnson to report members voting under Rule 40.7. Senator Johnson.
Mr. President, Senator Jasinski votes no.
Jasinski votes no. Senator Johnson.
Senator Ingebrigtsen votes no.
Ingebrigtsen votes no. Senator Johnson.
Senator Thomasoni votes no.
Thomasoni votes no.
Dames is
All members having voted, the Secretary will close the roll. There being 28 ayes and 39 nays, the motion does not prevail. The amendment is not adopted. Further discussion to Senate File 2876. Seeing none, the Secretary will give the bill its third reading.
Senate File Number 2876, a bill for an act relating to health and human services.
Third reading. Any further discussion? Senator Abler.
Well, thank you, Mr. President. I really do appreciate that last debate. That is the essence of what we're trying to do. You can discuss how we should best do it on that last topic, but and that's the point of our work here. So, well, with that, I urge people to vote yes, and we'll continue this debate with the other body, and come back with a bill that I think everybody will be very happy about. Thank you.
There being no further discussion, the Secretary will take the roll on Senate File 2876. I call on Senator Kunish to report members voting under Rule 40.7. Senator Kunish.
Thank you, Mr. President. Votes on the Senate File 2876. Senator Carlson votes no.
Carlson votes no. Senator Kunish.
Senator Champion votes no.
Champion votes no. Senator Kunish.
Senator Clausen votes no.
Clausen votes no. Senator Kunish.
Senator Dibble votes no.
Dibble votes no. Senator Kunish.
Senator Eaton votes no.
Eaton votes no. Senator Kunish.
Senator Eakin votes aye.
Eakin votes aye. Senator Kunish.
Senator Kent votes no.
Kent votes no. Senator Kunish.
Senator Newton votes aye.
Newton votes aye. Senator Kunish.
Senator Rest votes no.
Rest votes no. Senator Kunish.
Senator Torres Ray votes no.
Torres Ray votes no. Senator Kunish.
Senator Fateh votes no.
Fateh votes no. Senator Kunish.
And Senator McEwen votes no.
McEwen votes no. I call on Senator Johnson to report members voting under Rule 40.7. Senator Johnson.
Mr. President, Senator Jasinski votes aye.
Jasinski votes aye. Senator Johnson.
Senator Ingebretson votes aye.
Ingebrigtsen votes aye. Senator Johnson.
Senator Tomassoni votes aye.
Tomassoni votes aye. The Secretary will close the roll. Sorry, he did not close the roll. Senator Kunish, you have a change.
Yes, Mr. President. Senator Rest votes aye.
Senator Rest changes from no to aye. The Secretary will close the roll. There being 46 ayes and 21 nays, the motion does prevail. The Senate File 2876 does pass and is adopted, and this title is agreed to. Members, to the 13th order of business. Announcements. President has one announcement. I've made the warning before. Members, staff members need to have their badges on. Both sides need to be aware. That is the rule of the Senate. You do have to have a badge if you are on the Senate floor. Senator Senjum.
Thank you, Mr. President. Members, this is perhaps something I should have spoken to offline with the majority and minority members, but I just want to bring this up because I think it's an important part of our Senate tradition, and that is through the interim, through the COVID era, if you will, where this body was living with 12 in the room and so on and so forth. There have been a number of members actually who have former members who have passed on that I don't think really have been recognized in the way that in the true tradition of the Senate that we've had for years and years and years. So I would just ask if Majority Leader, Minority Leader, as they think about future agendas, if there happens to be a day when it's a little lighter, that maybe we could take up some of these individuals and talk to their life and legacy, if you will, in the Senate. Thank you, Mr. President.
Further announcements. Senator Miller.
Mr. President, I move that the Senate do now adjourn until Thursday, February 24th at 11 a.m.
To that motion, all those in favor signify by saying aye. Those opposed, motion does prevail. Senate is adjourned.